While shopping at Walmart, a veteran noticed a little girl in the children's toy section. She eagerly picked out a toy alongside a man who seemed to be her father. But when he saw them again outside, heading toward the parking lot, the girl turned around and waved at him. At that very moment, he realized something shocking, and knew he had to act immediately. Late in the afternoon, John Grayson, a 58-year-old veteran who had served in Afghanistan, was pushing his shopping cart down the aisles. He wasn't here to shop, not really. He just wanted to soak in the lively atmosphere, a small distraction from his lonely post-retirement life. As he passed by the toy section, he happened to notice a little girl. She was around 7 years old, with lightly curled brown hair and bright eyes that sparkled as she pointed excitedly at a glittering doll on the shelf. Beside her stood a tall, scruffy-looking man who nodded in response. "All right, go ahead and take it," the man said in a deep but somewhat strained voice. John found the scene heartwarming, even though he had no young children or grandchildren of his own to share such moments with. He continued walking, not thinking much of it. But everything changed when he stepped into the parking lot. John had just picked up his shopping bags when he spotted the pair again. They were heading toward an old gray pickup truck parked in a secluded corner. The little girl clutched the doll tightly, skipping alongside the man. Then, out of nowhere, she turned around, locking eyes with John amidst the bustling crowd. She smiled and waved enthusiastically, as if they were old friends. John hesitated before awkwardly waving back, but a strange sense of unease settled in his chest. And then, like a lightning strike to his mind, he realized something horrifying. He didn't know this girl. But those eyes were filled with hope, yet tinged with fear. And then he noticed it. The man's grip on her hand was too tight, too firm, not the way a loving father would hold his child. The man's gaze darted around nervously, as if he was afraid of being seen. There was no time to hesitate. The soldier in John took over. He set his bags down, pulled out his phone, and sent a message to an old friend at the police department. "Gray pickup truck, license plate 7KX, 492, Walmart. Possible abduction. Act now." Then, keeping his expression neutral, he casually made his way toward the truck, careful not to alarm the man. As he got closer, John pretended to drop his keys, crouching down to observe. Underneath the truck, he spotted an unusual oil stain, and peeking out from the back was a loose piece of rope. A tiny detail, but enough to make his pulse race. "Hey there, kiddo, did you drop this?" he asked, holding out his hand as if he'd picked something up from the ground, drawing both their attention. The girl turned, her eyes lighting up for a split second, but the man immediately yanked her closer. "No, that's not hers," he growled, his voice low and wary, his cold eyes scanning John with suspicion. "Oh, my mistake," John chuckled lightly, but his fingers had already curled around the handle of the folding knife in his pocket, a habit from the battlefield that had never left him. "Your truck is leaking oil. Want me to take a look?" John pointed at the stain, trying to stall. The man hesitated, clearly unwilling to draw attention to himself. But before he could react, the little girl suddenly screamed, "Mister, help me! I don't know him!" Her cry cut through the air like an arrow. The man flinched, then raised his hand to strike her. But John was faster. With the reflexes of a seasoned soldier, he lunged forward, locking the man's arms behind his back and slamming him to the ground. "Let the girl go. I'm not playing games," he growled, his voice shaking with fury. The sound of police sirens pierced the air, growing louder. The little girl, sobbing, ran to John and clung to his leg. In that chaotic moment, he realized he had just saved a life. Later, the police confirmed that the girl was Lily Thompson, the daughter of a family from a neighboring town who had been abducted 3 weeks ago. The man was a known criminal, infamous for luring children away from crowded supermarkets. That gray truck held damning evidence, ropes, duct tape, and photos of other victims. 3 days later, as John was making tea in his small kitchen, the doorbell rang softly. He opened the door to see a middle-aged man in a gray coat, looking exhausted but with determination in his eyes. "Mr. Grayson? I'm Daniel Harper, a private detective," the man said in a deep, warm voice. John invited him in, curious about what was going on. Daniel placed a thin file on the table and pulled out a photo of a blonde girl with clear blue eyes. "This is Mia, my daughter," he said, his voice breaking. "She went missing 4 years ago. I believe Carl Mitchell is part of a larger kidnapping network, and you, the man who saved Lily, might be able to help me." He pushed a small notebook toward John. "The police overlooked this, but I think it's a clue. I'm not good at decoding, but you were a soldier, you might understand it." John picked up the notebook, feeling a familiar sense of duty rising within him, even though he had only wanted a peaceful life. He and Daniel sat down, flipping through the pages. The jumbled symbols gradually became clear under John's hands. They were coordinates and timestamps of secret meetings. One location stood out, an abandoned warehouse 30 miles from town, with a meeting scheduled for that very night, just a few hours away. "We have to call the police," John said, but Daniel shook his head. "I don't know who to trust. If they're too slow, Mia will disappear forever." John sighed, then nodded. They got into the car and drove into the quiet night, bringing only flashlights and a sliver of hope. When they arrived, dim lights flickered inside the warehouse. Hiding behind some bushes, they observed 3 men talking beside several large cages. Inside were at least 10 children, their eyes red from crying but too scared to make a sound. Mia was there, her tangled blonde hair visible as she held a younger girl tightly, trying to comfort her. John whispered, "We can't take them head-on. We need another plan." Looking around, he spotted an old truck nearby. With his military experience, he silently climbed inside, released the parking brake, and let the truck roll downhill, crashing into a dumpster near the warehouse with a loud bang. The kidnappers panicked and rushed outside to investigate, leaving the children unattended. Daniel and John moved quickly. John used his pocket knife to cut the cage locks and whispered to the children, "Don't be afraid. Follow me." Daniel led them toward the woods while John stayed back to create a distraction. One of the men returned, and John pretended to be a lost traveler. "Excuse me, I think I'm lost. Where am I?" The man eyed him suspiciously, but before he could react, John stumbled, knocking over a pile of crates, adding to the confusion. The children reached the safety of a roadside where Daniel used a payphone to call the police. When authorities arrived, the kidnappers scattered in a panic, leaving behind crucial evidence. Mia and the other 9 children were rescued, clinging to Daniel in tears. John stood at a distance, watching the reunion in silence, feeling both relieved and heavy-hearted. The next day, Daniel visited John, bringing Mia with him. The little girl shyly stepped forward and handed John a crumpled drawing, a picture of an old man wearing a soldier's hat standing beside a little girl. Above it, in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, hero." John chuckled and patted her head. "You don't need to thank me," he said, "but keep that smile, okay?" Daniel gripped John's hand, his eyes misty. "You gave me my world back. If you ever need anything, call me." John nodded and watched them leave, thinking that, at last, everything was over. But life rarely left John in peace for long. A week later, as he was repairing the wooden fence in front of his house, a small white truck pulled up by the road. The driver, a middle-aged woman with neatly tied silver hair, stepped out. She wore a simple wool coat, but the sharpness in her eyes told John she was no ordinary person. "Mr. Grayson?" she asked, her voice firm and steady. John wiped his hands on his jeans and nodded, waiting. "I'm Ellen Carter," she said, handing him a worn-out business card that read, "Freelance Journalist. I heard about the warehouse incident. You and Harper did what the police couldn't do for years. I need to talk to you." John invited her inside and made 2 cups of tea, though he wasn't sure he wanted to get involved in more trouble. Ellen placed a small recorder on the table, but didn't turn it on. "I've been investigating this kidnapping network for over a decade," she said. "Mitchell was just a small piece. That coded notebook you deciphered? It didn't just lead to that warehouse. I found another set of coordinates in the copy Harper sent me, an old farm on the outskirts, 50 miles from here. I believe more children are still being held there, but I need someone trustworthy to confirm it." John frowned. "Why not call the police?" Ellen scoffed. "I tried twice. Both times, the traffickers vanished before the police arrived. Someone inside the force is protecting them." She locked eyes with John. "You're not a journalist or a cop, but you have a soldier's instincts and a rare sense of justice. I just need you to come with me, to observe." John hesitated. He wanted a quiet life, but the image of those caged children haunted him. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. But just to observe." Ellen nodded, and that afternoon, they drove toward the farm. By the time they arrived, dusk had settled. The old farm stood alone in the middle of a deserted field, with a weathered wooden house and a crumbling barn. Everything was eerily quiet, but John noticed fresh tire tracks leading to the entrance. Someone had been here recently. Ellen whispered, "Just as I suspected. They haven't abandoned this place." They crouched behind a bush, watching. Just then, a black van rolled in silently. 2 men stepped out and opened the back doors, and John's breath caught. 3 children, their hands loosely tied with rope, were pushed into the barn. John grabbed Ellen's hand, signaling for silence. He didn't want to act recklessly, but his heart pounded when he heard the quiet sobs of the children. "We have to do something," he whispered. Ellen nodded and pulled out her phone, recording from a distance. "I have a plan," she said. "Can you create a distraction?" John nodded, then silently circled around the back of the barn. He picked up a large rock and hurled it against a nearby metal barrel, creating a loud, echoing noise. The two men inside flinched and spun around. "Who's there?" one of them shouted. They stepped outside, leaving the children alone. Meanwhile, Ellen swiftly approached from the other side, using a small knife to cut their bindings. "Run across the field, hide behind that haystack," she whispered, leading them away. John continued his distraction by pretending to be a lost traveler. He stepped out of the shadows, hands raised. "Sorry, my car broke down nearby. Have you seen a gas station around here?" The men eyed him suspiciously, but before they could react, Ellen had already gotten the children to safety. She quickly texted a trusted contact at the local police department, someone outside the old corrupt team, attaching the audio recording and location coordinates. 20 minutes later, police cars arrived, arresting the two kidnappers as they fumbled to explain themselves to John. The three rescued children, 2 boys and a girl, were reunited with their families after their identities were confirmed. They revealed that they had been taken from a park weeks ago and were lucky to be saved before being transported elsewhere. Ellen wrote a detailed article, keeping John's name out of it as he requested. But the story spread across the region, shaking the criminal network. One evening, as John sat on his porch reading, his phone rang. It was Ellen. "John," she said, her voice urgent. "I just got a tip from an anonymous source. Another child was taken from a supermarket 2 days ago, and they mentioned you. They said, 'The old man from Baumart won't stop us this time.' Do you want to continue?" "I'm in," he said, his voice calm but firm. After the call, John's eyes fell on a small rope bracelet, a gift from one of the rescued children. He was no longer the young soldier who once charged through the battlefields of Afghanistan, but life seemed to be calling him back, not to fight, but to protect. "I'm in," he had told Ellen, and now he knew he needed a real plan instead of just acting on instinct like before. The next morning, John met Ellen at a small cafe in town. She sat in a secluded corner, a cup of cold coffee in front of her, and a thick stack of notes spread across the table. "The supermarket is in the East District, 40 miles from here," Ellen began, sliding a piece of paper toward John. It contained a rough map and a few cryptic messages from the anonymous source. The kid was wearing a red shirt, taken near the toy section. "The old man from Baumart won't stop us this time." John frowned. "They know me," he said darkly. "And they're challenging me." Ellen nodded. "This isn't just another kidnapping, John. They're sending a message, that no matter how many kids you save, they'll keep going. I think their leader is finally revealing himself, but he's staying in the shadows." She pointed at a note. The source mentioned the theater. It could be a code name or a real location. John thought for a moment, then something clicked. A few miles from the Eastern supermarket, there was an old abandoned theater, once a hangout spot for drug addicts before it was shut down. "If they're using that place as a transfer point," he said, "we need to check it out." But John didn't want to rush in recklessly this time. He convinced Ellen to contact Daniel Harper, the private detective who had helped him rescue Mia. Though still recovering from the warehouse incident, Daniel agreed to assist remotely. "I have a friend in the East District Police," he said over speakerphone. "She's clean, not tied to any corrupt officers. I'll have her watch the supermarket. But John, be careful, don't let them recognize you right away." John had an idea. Instead of heading straight for the theater, he decided to disguise himself. With Ellen's help, he dressed in worn-out plumber's clothes, a cap pulled low over his face, and carried a rusty toolbox as a prop. "If they're looking for the old man from Baumart, I won't let them see me like that," he said with a smirk. Ellen chuckled but still looked worried. "If they catch you, you don't have any weapons." "My weapon is surprise," John replied before getting into the car with Ellen, heading east. At the supermarket, they parked in a hidden spot. Ellen went inside, pretending to shop while keeping an eye on the surroundings. John remained outside, watching through the rearview mirror. After 30 tense minutes, Ellen returned, whispering urgently. "I saw a boy in a red shirt near the toy section. He was with a strange woman. She kept checking her watch, like she was waiting for someone." John nodded. "The theater is 10 minutes away. If they take the boy, we follow." As expected, a white van appeared. The woman led the boy inside. His face was full of fear, but he didn't dare to cry. John and Ellen followed from a distance, keeping enough space to avoid detection. The van stopped in front of the abandoned theater, where the street lights no longer reached. John signaled for Ellen to stay in the car and called Daniel's contact with their coordinates while he quietly approached. Through a broken window, John saw the boy being led into a back room behind the stage. 2 other men were waiting inside. One of them, tall and wearing a leather jacket, seemed to be in charge. John overheard snippets of conversation, Grayson thinks he's won, but this time, we'll leave a mark. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't just about kidnapping. They wanted revenge by hurting more children. John couldn't wait for the police. He slipped around to the back entrance, finding an old trash bin full of empty cans. He carefully tipped it over, letting it roll down the hallway with a loud clatter. The two men rushed out to investigate, leaving the boy alone with the woman. John seized the moment, stepping through a side door and lowering his voice. Plumbing check. Someone called for a repair. The woman startled. No one called. John smiled warmly. Oh, must be a mistake. But this little guy looks scared. Maybe I should take him outside for some fresh air. Before she could react, John took the boy's hand and whispered, "Run with me." The boy nodded, and they bolted toward the back exit. The woman screamed, but before anyone could stop them, the distant wail of police sirens filled the air. Daniel's contact had arrived just in time. Inside the theater, the criminals scattered. The man in the leather jacket shouted, "Grayson, you'll pay for this," before vanishing into the shadows. The boy, Timmy, was soon reunited with his parents, a young couple who had reported him missing that morning. They clung to John, thanking him repeatedly, but he simply waved them off. "I only did what needed to be done." Yet, the leather-jacketed man's threat lingered in his mind. On the drive home, Ellen said, "He knows your name. He's the mastermind, and he won't stop." A few days later, John received a small package. Inside was an old music box, the kind once popular in theaters. As he lifted the lid, a slow, eerie melody played. Alongside it was a note. "Thanks for the great performances, Grayson. But the final act will be mine." John snapped the box shut, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. He called Ellen and Daniel, his voice firm. "We have to end this." They regrouped, analyzing every clue they had gathered: Mitchell's notebook, locations, threats. Daniel uncovered a missed detail. All the coordinates traced a path leading to an abandoned resort on the outskirts of town, once a famous tourist spot before going bankrupt. "If he wants a final act," John said, "that's his stage." This time, they wouldn't go in alone. With help from Daniel's police contact, they planned carefully. John still disguised himself as a repairman, but this time, Ellen gave him a tiny recording device. When they reached the resort, dim lights flickered from the main building. Inside, the man in the leather jacket, now revealed as Victor Kane, a former theater manager with a criminal past, stood among a group of men. In front of them, two children sat tied loosely to chairs. John stepped inside, playing dumb. "I'm here for a plumbing fix. Who called?" Victor smirked. "You really think I wouldn't recognize you, Grayson?" But John didn't flinch. He discreetly activated the recorder in his pocket and pressed on, "I'm just an ordinary man. What do you want with these kids?" Victor, arrogant, started bragging. "You ruined my operation, but I'll rebuild. And it starts here, with these kids." That was all the police needed. Officers stormed in from all sides, arresting Victor and his gang. John hurried to untie the children, comforting them until their families arrived. As Victor was led away, he sneered at John, whispering, "You win this time, but I'll be back." John simply replied, "I'll always be here." A month later, John sat on his porch, a cup of tea in hand. The children in town had started calling him the kind old man, and more friendship bracelets and drawings from the rescued kids arrived at his doorstep. Ellen published the final article, exposing Victor's network, while Daniel recovered, promising to stand with John if needed. Then the phone rang, an unknown number. John answered, hearing a small, timid voice. "Thank you, sir. I made it home." John smiled, knowing that whether Victor returned or not, he had found his purpose, protecting the pure, innocent laughter of these children.